I tweeted a picture out of the graphic you're about to see, and I said something about, it's interesting how not every one who votes for National Act is racist, but all the racists vote for National Act. You know? So let's
when
just...
you've got to hand draw your concerns on the board, maybe you're not the most important person in the room.
Well, we'll get to that. Let's have a look at the story about this. National supporters are now making their own billboards to make sure the country knows what their big concerns are.
That's right. The National Party has been asking its supporters which issues they care about most, and they've been doing this by putting up posters with suggested issues like the cost of living, law and order, housing, the economy, and then getting them to put stickers next to each of the issues that they want to see the party talking about. But at the Kati market, some have taken it upon themselves.
So for people who don't know, Kati is just north of Tauranga, so Western Bay of Plenty, sort of as you're heading the northern road out of Tauranga, it's just right about there. So very, very, very white, very, very elderly.
To add the options of co-governance and quote-unquote pidgin English.
Now we say quote-unquote because they spelt it wrong. So they spelt pidgin English wrong because they're that fucking stupid. Now, before we go on with this thing, there's the one thing I wanted to show you. People are like, no big deal. But in this little unscientific survey, more people are concerned about co-governance than housing or the environment. So I think there's 8 stickers, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 stickers for co-governance, and there's 7 for the environment, and there's 7 for housing. As you can see, law and order at the bottom, education and cost of living or the economy are the big ones. But then after that, co-governance. Now, is that a issue around racism? Well, let's get to that debate once we get through the story.
Yes.
Earning collectively 11 stickers. This has been slammed online as racist and disgusting. National leader Christopher Luxon says it is not something the National Party endorses. The National Party itself has told Newsup in a statement it is unacceptable and we will be addressing it.
Now, we come back to this conversation we've had lots of times. If we did a podcast about car mechanics, right? Then what you would expect is have car mechanics listening to it. So therefore, if you've got racists and people who are racist sort of taking on board your message and wondering, what message are you putting out to have them? It's always important when the National Party or whatever group it is want to back away from their supporters. And this goes across the board. But if you have, if you've got 1 or 2, there's always the outlier. But if you have a plethora of supporters speaking with one disgusting voice, at what point do you look at yourself and go, what messages are we really sending out there? Today's episode is brought to you by bhnshop.nz. Yep, that's right. Big Hairy News has merch that enables you to both support what we do and allows you to voice your political opinions via the international medium of clothing. Head to bhnshop.nz for this month's drop of either If the Left Vote, the Left Wins, or Christopher Luxon, not a businessman, just a board member, with free delivery in New Zealand. This month's drop ends July 20th, so be quick and head to bhnshop.nz to make your order and support what we're doing to fight mis- and disinformation this election cycle. That's bhnshop.nz.
The issue here is that this very poster shows the issues that national supporters want the party to be talking about. It is crime, it is the cost of living, it is housing and education. Instead, stunts like this, having pidgin English on National Party branding, mean that the party sucks up oxygen as it attempts to distance itself from the very ugly side of the race debate.
Right, so a couple of other things, and the reason I asked the question, is it racist, is it not racist, is actually, I think, a comment by Willie Jackson. Let me see if I can find the right one, who was being quite gracious about it. Right, so there's the image. And National MP Scott Simpson said the addition of the words pigeon, which is spelt wrong, English, to a National Party poster that canvassed voters' views on the issue was inappropriate, and it won't happen again. The poster was at a National Party stand at the market in Katikati in April. It was put on Twitter this morning by New Zealand Herald columnist Shane Tapo and described as disgusting and racist by others. Coromandel MP Scott Simpson said as far as he could ascertain, a party volunteer added the categories in response to questions from members of the public. This won't happen again. Asked if it was racist, he said, I think it was in response to members of the public. I don't think it's appropriate, and I wouldn't have done it. Asked if he was referring to the pidgin English, which is the way you spelled it there, P-I-D-G-I-N, English reference, or the co-governance, he said both. Labour Māori Seats campaign chair Willie Jackson said he couldn't quite understand what the pidgin English referred to, but if it related to the use of te reo Māori, he did not believe such views were widespread. People are quick to use the word racism or use the racism word. I think it's probably more ignorance than anything else, was what Willie Jackson had to say. Finally, it's coming off the back, and I think this came out yesterday and we didn't cover it, of Christopher Luxon and David Seymour are being labelled as racist by Te Māori's Debbie Ngarewa Packer. Christopher Luxon has definitely used anti-Māori rhetoric to be able to gain points with his voters. Challenged by the Hui's host Julian Wilcox to say whether the National Party leader was racist, Ngarewa Packer replied, yes. Ngarewa Packer said Seymour was using the same social theory for moral panic, utilising the same tool of racism, and racists have to use those tools because they can't rely on intelligent pro-Māori tangata whenua rights. That's what they are doing, is to create their might over right, to create disharmony and division in Aotearoa. In response, Seymour said that they never say what that racist rhetoric is. ACT stands for Universal Human Rights and services targeted on need rather than race. Besides not being racist in itself, there are many positions many Māori agree with, he said in a statement. It's the Māori Party that has little to offer but racial framing of every issue. It's ACT's detailed policies on housing, education and the economy that would open up an opportunity to all, regardless of race. A spokesperson for Luxon said Ngarewa Packer's comments says more about them than it does about us. They are demonstrating precisely why under no circumstances will national government with the Māori Party after the election. So let's bring back up the image. There it is, Chewy. Yours, sir.
Cool. I just want to first acknowledge what David Seymour's said there, because he's done it a couple of times and it's really starting to fuck me off. They go, we believe in universal human rights and not doing any discrimination based on race. That's great. If you're the race on top, you can say that.
Yeah, for sure.
But not taking into account the inequalities that come out of our system and the way that Europeans have built the New Zealand system, ignoring that is racist. Because the outcomes are not the same. It's the difference between, equity and equality. Everybody can get treated the same, but their outcomes aren't the same. Their lifespans aren't the same. The treatment they receive in the education and, the court system, the health system are not the same. So if all of those things are equal and someone's still getting the shit end of the stick, we're not doing it right. And sometimes you need to lift people up.
And listen, we've said this before, as probably a couple of blokes, if we're honest here, I don't like speaking on behalf of you, who aren't the target of racism. So we're speaking from the outside looking in, but I always think about systemic racism and historical racism impacting today, and I always use this example. If your father was incredibly wealthy, would you positively benefit from that? Yes. If your grandfather was incredibly wealthy, would you still probably benefit from that? If your great-grandfather was, if your great-great-great-grandfather was, would you probably still benefit from that today? Yes. Okay, now flip it. If your father abused you and treated you like shit, would you get a negative impact from that today? Yes. And then you can go through and very quickly you can see how it only takes 2 or 3 or 4 generations of positive or negative interactions. Now, flip that again to say if the government treated you a certain way in the last generation, 2 generations ago, 3 generations ago, could you still be seeing the impact of that today? And of course the answer is yes. And anyone who say otherwise is actually just lying. I would normally say something like is either ignorant or lying, but is actually just lying. It's very easy to have a look at things like, and I used to do this a lot in Talkback, I'd get Māori phoning me saying in the 1950s I got beaten for speaking my language. Oh, I wonder why they had to start to rebuild Te Reo in the 70s and 80s. Because in the 50s, that generation, the kids had it beaten out of them by the education system. Is there a chance that's still flowing on to what's happening today? Of course there is. Because it doesn't change overnight and it doesn't change with one generation. And that's the systemic issues we're still seeing today. So absolutely, some of these dog whistle terms are based in racism, historical racism. And as Chewy just said, if you're part of the ethnicity or the race that's sitting on top, then you're like, no, it's all fine. It's fine for me. No, look, I've got friends who are Māori. Sorry, if I said that, I'd probably say, I've got friends who are Maori. That's probably how I'd say it. And it's ignorance, and it is just rooted and stemmed in racism.
Absolutely. Now, ignorance is another thing that was mentioned. That is fair. People can be ignorant, and it's not malicious. But the moment that you're educated and you still continue to do the same thing, then it is racism. And if we can get back to this national racist mood board that they've managed to put up, I think it comes out of one thing. And Mark in the comments has absolutely nailed it. When you're used to privilege, equality looks like oppression.
Yeah, it's
you
great.
feel like you're losing something and you aren't.
Yeah.
You know, it is no great umbrage to learn that, hey, maybe the way that you pronounce the town down the road your whole life is wrong, and someone's telling you this is actually the correct way to say it, and everybody on the news is saying it the correct way. They are not saying you're stupid. They're just correcting you. It's not a personal attack.
Yeah,
you know,
I mean,
we're flexible people. We can change our thinking. We can learn new things. Stop being scared of this.
If Adidas came out and made it very clear that the way you pronounce it is Adidas, which is the way the rest of the world pronounces it, would it be an attack on one's virtue to say, oh, it's pronounced Adidas? You know, if Subaru said, look, the world over, we want them to be sold as Subarus, would it be an attack on anyone's, personality or whatever to correct them for saying it's not Subaru, it's pronounced Subaru? They've made that, the company's made that very clear how they want to do it. Of course it wouldn't. If it's not Taupo, but it's Taupō, is that an attack on you personally? Of course it's not.